Before Twilight, before True Blood, there was Anne Rice. She gave us Lestat, Louis, and an entire world of immortal beings. More than just a writer, Anne Rice was a cultural phenomenon. Anne Rice's novels weren't just books. They were experiences. From the Gothic streets of New Orleans to the heart of vampire lore, Anne Rice's life was as captivating as her books. She wrestled with demons, both real and imagined. Anne Rice's life was a battle between light and darkness, mirroring the very themes she explored in her unforgettable vampire sagas. In this episode of Celebrity Afterlife, we remember the life of Anne Rice and help to keep her memory alive. Howard Allen Francis O'Brien was born in New Orleans on October 4, 1941, the second of four daughters to Howard O'Brien, 1917 to 1991, and Catherine K. Allen O'Brien, 1908 to 1956, a couple of Irish Catholic heritage. Her father, a lifelong New Orleans resident and a Navy veteran of World War II, served as a personnel executive for the U.S. Postal Service. A man of literary aspirations, he authored a novel, The Impulsive Imp, which was published posthumously. Her elder sister, Alice Burchard, would later find her own voice as an author, crafting works of fantasy and historical romance. Anne Rice's formative years were largely spent in New Orleans, a city that serves as the evocative backdrop for much of her literary output. She resided with her family in a rented dwelling on St. Charles Avenue in the Irish Channel. This residence, belonging to her maternal grandmother, Alice Allen, affectionately known as Mama Allen, was, in Rice's words, situated within what was broadly perceived as a Catholic ghetto. Alice Allen, who, shortly after separating from her husband, a man struggling with alcoholism, took on the role of a domestic worker, became a pivotal figure in Anne Rice's early life. She provided stability and held the family together, as Rice's mother succumbed to the ravages of alcoholism. Though Allen passed away in 1949, the O'Brien family continued to reside in her home until 1956. At that time, they relocated further down St. Charles Avenue to a building that had formerly served as a rectory, convent and school, owned by the parish. This move was undertaken to be nearer both to the church and to the support system available to assist Catherine in her struggle with addiction. During her childhood, Rice received her education at St. Alphonsus School, a Catholic institution where her father had also been a student. About her male given names, Rice said, "Well, my birth name is Howard Allen, because apparently my mother thought it was a good idea to name me Howard. My father's name was Howard. She wanted to name me after Howard, and she thought it was a very interesting thing to do. She was a bit of a bohemian, a bit of a mad woman, a bit of a genius, and a great deal of a great teacher. And she had the idea that naming a woman Howard was going to give that woman an unusual advantage in the world." As Catherine Ramsland recounts in her authorized biography, Prism of the Night, Anne Rice's given name, Howard Allen Francis O'Brien, was bestowed upon her by her father. Reflecting on his own experience of having a name associated with girls, and perhaps wishing to relinquish it, Howard named his daughter Howard Allen Francis O'Brien. However, on her first day of school, a simple exchange with a nun irrevocably altered her destiny. When asked her name, the young Howard, finding Anne a more appealing alternative, offered it as her own. Her mother, present at the scene, and understanding her daughter's sensitivity surrounding her given name, chose not to correct the innocent misrepresentation, thus cementing Anne's chosen identity. From that day forward, she was universally known as Anne, a name that was legally formalized in 1947. Upon her confirmation into the Catholic Church at the age of 12, she embraced the full name Howard Allen Francis Alphonsus Ligori O'Brien, incorporating the name of a saint and that of her aunt, a nun. Reflecting on this, Rice commented, "I was honored to have my aunt's name, but it was my burden and joy as a child to have strange names." At the age of 15, Rice experienced the profound loss of her mother, who succumbed to the devastating effects of alcoholism. Rice characterized St. Joseph's as an institution reminiscent of something out of Jane Eyre, a dilapidated, awful, medieval type of place. She confessed, "I really hated it and wanted to leave. I felt betrayed by my father." In November 1957, Rice's father remarried, wedding Dorothy Van Bever. Recalling their initial encounter, Rice shared, "My father penned a formal letter inviting her to lunch, which I nervously hand-delivered to her residence. I was so nervous." He enclosed a pin with the note, which she was to wear if she accepted the invitation. The following day, she wore the pin. In 1958, when Rice was 16, her father relocated the family to North Texas, where they purchased their first home in Richardson. It was at Richardson High School, in a journalism class, where they were both students, that Rice first encountered her future husband, Stan Rice. After graduating from Richardson High School in 1959, Rice completed her freshman year at Texas Woman's University in Denton, before transferring to North Texas State College for her sophomore year. Financial constraints, coupled with an inability to secure employment, forced her to withdraw from her studies. Shortly thereafter, she journeyed to San Francisco, where she resided with a friend's family, until she found work as an insurance claims processor. She then encouraged her former Texas Woman's University roommate, Ginny Mathis, to join her, and together they secured an apartment in the vibrant Haight-Ashbury district. Mathis obtained employment at the same insurance firm as Rice. Soon after settling in, they both began pursuing evening courses at the University of San Francisco, a Jesuit institution that, while primarily for men, permitted women to enroll in night classes. During Easter break, Anne returned to Texas, where she rekindled her romance with Stan Rice. Following her return to San Francisco, Stan visited her for a week during the summer. After his departure, Anne moved back in with the Percys, and in August, Mathis left San Francisco to pursue a nursing program in Oklahoma. Subsequently, Anne received a special delivery letter from Stan, containing a proposal of marriage. They were wed on October 14, 1961, in Denton, Texas, shortly after Anne's 20th birthday and just weeks shy of Stan's 19th. In 1962, the Rices returned to San Francisco, finding themselves immersed in the burgeoning hippie movement as residents of the Haight-Ashbury district, Berkeley, and later, the Castro district. "I'm a totally conservative person," she later confided to the New York Times. "In the middle of Haight-Ashbury in the 1960s, I was typing away while everybody was dropping acid and smoking grass. I was known as my own square." Rice pursued her education at San Francisco State University, graduating in 1964 with a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science. On September 21, 1966, the Rices welcomed their daughter, Michelle, affectionately known as Mouse. This event prompted Rice to interrupt her graduate studies at SFSU and pursue a doctoral program at the University of California, Berkeley. However, she soon found herself disillusioned by the program's focus on literary criticism and its demanding language requirements. "I wanted to be a writer, not a literature student," she later explained. In 1970, Rice resumed her studies at San Francisco State University, this time focusing on creative writing, and earned her Master of Arts degree in 1972. Shortly after receiving his own master's in creative writing from the same institution, Stan Rice joined the faculty at San Francisco State, eventually chairing the creative writing department before his retirement in 1988. While Rice was still pursuing her graduate studies in 1970, her daughter received a devastating diagnosis of acute granulocytic leukemia. Rice later recounted a dream she had experienced months before Michelle's illness manifested, in which her daughter was dying from something wrong with her blood. Tragically, Michelle passed away in 1972, just shy of her 6th birthday. In 1978, Rice's son, Christopher, was born in Berkeley, California. He has since become a successful author in his own right, publishing his first novel at the age of 22. Rice, who has openly discussed her struggles with alcoholism, and her husband, Stan, made the conscious decision to abstain from alcohol in mid-1979. Shortly after Christopher's birth, determined to shield their son from the damaging effects of addiction that she herself had experienced as a child. Rice's own battle with alcoholism, which tragically claimed her mother's life when Anne was just 15, had intensified following the death of her daughter, Michelle, in 1972. In 2008, Rice commemorated 28 years of sobriety in a YouTube video. Rice cited a diverse array of literary giants as influences on her work, including Charles Dickens, Virginia Woolf, John Milton, Ernest Hemingway, William Shakespeare, the Brontë sisters, Jean-Paul Sartre, Henry James, Arthur Conan Doyle, H. Rider Haggard, and Stephen King. She frequently turned to King's Firestarter for inspiration, stating, "I study the novel Firestarter whenever I'm blocked." Reading the first few pages of Firestarter helps to get me going. Under the pseudonym Anne Rampling, chosen in homage to actress Charlotte Rampling, whose grace she admired, she authored the novels Exit to Eden and Belinda. Amidst the profound grief following the loss of her daughter, 1966 to 1972, Rice revisited a previously written short story and transformed it into her debut novel, the internationally acclaimed Interview with the Vampire. It has been suggested that her daughter, Michelle, 1966 to 1972, who tragically succumbed to leukemia, served as the inspiration for the character of Claudia, the child vampire portrayed by Kirsten Dunst in the 1994 film adaptation of Interview with the Vampire. Rice drew inspiration for her vampires from Gloria Holden's portrayal in Dracula's Daughter. As she explained, "It established to me what vampires were. These elegant, tragic, sensitive people. I was really just going with that feeling when writing Interview with the Vampire. I didn't do a lot of research." Following the completion of the novel and a series of rejections from publishers, Rice developed obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD. During this period, she became consumed by a fear of contamination, believing that everything she touched was tainted. This obsession manifested in compulsive hand-washing rituals and an incessant need to verify the security of locks on windows and doors. Reflecting on this experience, Rice commented, "What you see when you're in that state is every single flaw in our hygiene, and you can't control it, and you go crazy." In August 1974, after a year of therapy to address her OCD, Rice attended the Squaw Valley Writers' Conference at Olympic Valley, led by writer Ray Nelson. It was there that she met her future literary agent, Phyllis Seidel. That October, Seidel successfully sold the publishing rights to Interview with the Vampire to Alfred Knopf for a $12,000 advance on the hardcover rights, a remarkable sum at a time when most debut authors received advances of around $2,000. Interview with the Vampire was subsequently published in May 1976. The following year, 1977, the Rices embarked on their first travels to Europe and Egypt. In the wake of Interview with the Vampire's publication, and while residing in California, Rice's literary output diversified. She penned 2 historical novels, The Feast of All Saints and Cry to Heaven, alongside 3 erotic novels, The Claiming of Sleeping Beauty, Beauty's Punishment, and Beauty's Release, published under the pseudonym A.N. Roquelaure. She also released 2 additional works, Exit to Eden and Belinda, under the name Anne Rampling. Rice then returned to the realm of vampires, crafting the vampire Lestat and the Queen of the Damned, both best-selling sequels to her debut novel. Shortly after her return to New Orleans in June 1988, Rice, inspired by her joy at coming home, began writing The Witching Hour. She continued to expand her Vampire Chronicles series, which ultimately comprised 10 novels, and followed The Witching Hour with Lasher and Taltos, thus completing the Lives of the Mayfair Witches trilogy. In 1997, she also published Violin, a story centered on a ghostly haunting. Rice made an appearance on an episode of The Real World, New Orleans. Rice embarked on another literary endeavor, the Christ the Lord series, beginning with Christ the Lord, Out of Egypt, published in 2005, which chronicles the life of Jesus. Following her move to Rancho Mirage, California, in 2006, she wrote the second volume, Christ the Lord, The Road to Cana, released in March 2008, and was at work on the third, Christ the Lord, Kingdom of Heaven, as of November 2008. During this period, she also authored the first 2 installments in her Songs of the Seraphim series, Angel Time, and of Love and Evil, as well as her memoir, called Out of Darkness, A Spiritual Confession. On March 9, 2014, during an appearance on her son Christopher's radio program, The Dinner Party with Christopher Rice and Eric Shaw Quinn, Rice announced the completion of another volume in the Vampire Chronicles, entitled Prince Lestat, which she described as a true sequel to Queen of the Damned. This work was subsequently published on October 28, 2014. The following year, in 2015, readers were treated to Beauty's Kingdom, a sequel to the Sleeping Beauty trilogy. Upon its 1976 debut, Interview with the Vampire met with a mixed reception from critics, prompting Rice to temporarily withdraw from the supernatural genre. However, the 1985 release of The Vampire Lestat was met with a far more favorable response from both critics and readers, with the first hardcover edition selling an impressive 75,000 copies. The publication of The Queen of the Damned in 1988 marked a significant turning point, with an initial hardcover print run of 405,000 copies. Chosen as a main selection of the Literary Guild of America for 1988, the novel ascended to the top of the New York Times bestseller list, remaining there for over 4 months. Rice's novels have resonated deeply with many within the LGBT+ community, some of whom interpret her vampire characters as allegorical representations of isolation and social alienation. A reviewer for the Boston Globe echoed this sentiment, observing that the vampires in her novels embody the walking alienated, those of us who, by choice or not, dwell on the fringe. Addressing this interpretation of her work, Rice remarked, "From the beginning, I've had gay fans and gay readers who felt that my works involved a sustained gay allegory. I didn't set out to do that, but that was what they perceived. So, even when Christopher was a baby, I had gay readers and gay friends, knew gay people, and lived in San Francisco's Castro district, which was a gay neighborhood." Anne Rice's writings have been recognized as a significant force in shaping the evolution of vampire fiction. As Susan Fajaro observed in the New York Times, Rice turns vampire conventions inside out. By shifting the narrative focus from the victim to the vampire, a reversal of traditional perspectives happens. Rice elicits horror from the reader's growing awareness of the monster residing within themselves. Furthermore, her vampires are not merely creatures of the night, but articulate philosophers who grapple with the timeless questions of good and evil throughout their extended existence. Anne Rice's prose has been the subject of considerable analysis. Susan Fajaro, in a comment representative of many reviewers, characterized her writing as florid, both lurid and lyrical, and full of sensuous detail. Conversely, some critics have found her style to be verbose and excessively philosophical. Author William Patrick Day, for example, notes that her writing is often long, convoluted, and imprecise. New York Times critic Michiko Kakutani offered a slightly different perspective, describing Rice's imagination as Gothic crossed with a campy taste for the decadent and the bizarre. In June 1988, buoyed by the success of the vampire Lestat, and with the impending publication of The Queen of the Damned, the Rices acquired a second residence in New Orleans, the Brevard Rice House, constructed in 1857 for Albert Hamilton Brevard. Stan subsequently took a leave of absence from his teaching position, and the couple relocated to New Orleans. Within a few months, they resolved to make the historic house their permanent home. In 1998, after decades of estrangement, Rice returned to the Catholic Church. That same year, on December 14th, she fell into a coma, later determined to be a result of diabetic ketoacidosis, and narrowly escaped death. This near-fatal experience led to a diagnosis of type 1 diabetes mellitus, requiring lifelong insulin therapy. Following her husband's passing and heeding his advice, Rice underwent gastric bypass surgery in 2003, subsequently losing 103 pounds. In 2004, Rice again faced a life-threatening health crisis, this time due to an intestinal blockage, a frequent complication of gastric bypass surgery. As Newsweek reported in 2005, she came close to death last year, when she had surgery for an intestinal blockage, and also back in 1998, when she went into a sudden diabetic coma. That same year she returned to the Roman Catholic Church, which she'd left at 18. Her return to the church, however, did not signify a complete alignment with its social doctrines. Rice remained a staunch advocate for equality for gay men and lesbians, including marriage rights, as well as for abortion rights and access to birth control, writing extensively on these issues. In October 2005, while promoting her book Christ the Lord, Out of Egypt, Rice announced in Newsweek that she would henceforth dedicate her life and literary talents to glorifying her faith in God. However, she clarified that this new focus did not represent a repudiation of her previous works, acknowledging a connection between those earlier writings and the evolution of her spiritual journey. In the author's note from Christ the Lord, Out of Egypt, Rice states, "I had experienced an old-fashioned, strict Roman Catholic childhood. In the 1940s and 1950s, we attended daily Mass and Communion in an enormous and magnificently decorated church. Stained glass windows, the Latin Mass, the detailed answers to complex questions on good and evil. These things were imprinted on my soul forever. I left this church at age 18. I wanted to know what was happening, why so many seemingly good people didn't believe in any organized religion, yet cared passionately about their behavior and value of their lives. I broke with the church. I wrote many novels without my being aware that they reflected my quest for meaning in a world without God." In her memoir called Out of Darkness, A Spiritual Confession, Rice stated, "In the moment of surrender, I let go of all the theological or social questions which had kept me from God for countless years. I simply let them go. There was the sense, profound and wordless, that if He knew everything, I did not have to know everything, and that in seeking to know everything, I'd been, all of my life, missing the entire point. No social paradox, no historic disaster, no hideous record of injustice or misery should keep me from Him. No question of scriptural integrity, no torment over the fate of this or that atheist or gay friend, no worry for those condemned and ostracized by my church or any other church should stand between me and Him. The reason? It was magnificently simple. He knew how or why everything happened. He knew the disposition of every single soul. He wasn't going to let anything happen by accident. Nobody was going to go to hell by mistake." On January 18, 2004, Anne Rice announced via her website her plans to leave New Orleans. She cited the loneliness following her husband's death and her son's move to California as motivating factors. On January 30th, she placed her largest of 3 homes on the market and subsequently relocated to a gated community in Kenner, Louisiana. "Simplifying my life, not owning so much, that's the chief goal," Rice explained. "I'll no longer be a citizen of New Orleans in the true sense." In March and April of 2005, Rice divested herself of 2 condominium properties in New York City. Following the completion of Christ the Lord, Out of Egypt, she departed New Orleans in 2005, shortly before the devastating events of Hurricane Katrina in August. Fortuitously, none of her former New Orleans residences sustained flood damage, and Rice remained a vocal and active supporter of the city and its relief efforts. Following her departure from New Orleans, Rice initially settled in La Jolla, California, where, in November 2005, she described the weather as like heaven. However, her sojourn in La Jolla proved brief, lasting less than a year. Beginning in January 2006, citing the weather's chill, she sought a new residence. Having purchased a 6-bedroom home in Rancho Mirage, California, in late 2005, she moved there in 2006, a location that afforded her closer proximity to her son in Los Angeles. In July 2010, Rice's extensive collection of antique dolls was auctioned at Therios in Chicago. Between mid-2010 and early 2011, she also auctioned a selection of her wardrobe. jewelry, household items, and collectibles, many of which had been featured in her books via eBay. Additionally, a substantial portion of her personal library was sold to Powell's Books. Rice publicly announced her disdain for the current state of Christianity on her Facebook page on July 28, 2010. "Today I quit being a Christian. I remain committed to Christ as always, but not to being Christian or to being part of Christianity. It's simply impossible for me to belong to this quarrelsome, hostile, disputatious, and deservedly infamous group. For 10 years I've tried. I've failed. I'm an outsider. My conscience will allow nothing else." Shortly thereafter, she clarified her statement. "My faith in Christ is central to my life. My conversion from a pessimistic atheist lost in a world I didn't understand, to an optimistic believer in a universe created and sustained by a loving God is crucial to me. But following Christ does not mean following his followers. Christ is infinitely more important than Christianity, and always will be. No matter what Christianity is, has been, or might become." Rice's pronouncements regarding her departure from Christianity elicited considerable commentary from journalists and pundits alike. In an interview with the Los Angeles Times, she elaborated on her perspective regarding membership in a Christian church, stating, "I feel much more morally comfortable walking away from organized religion. I respect that there are all kinds of denominations and all kinds of churches, but it's the entire controversy, the entire conversation that I need to walk away from right now." When asked, "How do you follow Christ without a church?" Rice responded, "I think the basic ritual is simply prayer. It's talking to God, putting things in the hands of God. Trusting that you're living in God's world and praying for God's guidance. And being absolutely faithful to the core principles of Jesus' teachings." In 2010, Rice shared her spiritual journey in a short documentary for the I Am Second project. Later, in a Facebook post dated April 14, 2013, she identified herself as a secular humanist. However, she subsequently clarified, in a July 28, 2014, Facebook post, that while Christ remained a central figure in her life, her relationship with him was not defined by the tenets of organized religion. In a later interview with Alice Cooper, she stated, "My faith lives in my novels, of course. It lives in every word I write. It lives in my novels about Jesus. Though I've moved away from institutional Christianity and organized religion, and all its theological strife, my devotion to Jesus remains fierce. My faith blazes in my vampire novels and in the Witching Hour series, and even in the erotica I've written. I believe that people are basically good, as Anne Frank put it. I believe the creation is basically good and beautiful. I believe that sex is beautiful and good. I believe our capacity to love, to know pleasure, to want to live lives of meaning, all this reflects the existence of a loving and personal creator. This is why the story of the Incarnation is so important to me. The story of Jesus being born amongst us, growing up amongst us, working and sweating and struggling as we do, and dying amongst us before he rose from the dead and ascended into heaven. I write about outsiders seeking redemption in one form or another, and always will. Anne had a collection of several hundred pairs of black vintage button-up shoes. She was of Irish and 1/8 German descent. Her sister, Alice Burchard, was also a novelist. Her novel, The Mummy, was almost adapted into a feature film by James Cameron in the 1990s. She had also written under the pseudonyms Anne Rampling and Anne Roquelaure. To write something, you have to risk making a fool of yourself. The vampire is that glittering, dazzling rule-breaker and outsider who has gained ascendancy over time and place. The vampire is always presented as someone who is living a heightened existence, and that is very seductive. He is also someone who is able to satisfy all of his cravings. I don't see this as a time of weakness at all. The vampire image reflects the enormous leap in visual perspective. This is the time of Federal Express, long-distance calls and faxes. Someone can get up in the morning and call New York or Paris. All kinds of business transactions and close book deals can be made. It's like flying all over the world. Vampires are superhuman magnifications of us, of the way we feel in these powerful times. Vampires have always been part of our culture. There have always been superstitions surrounding death and burial in Western Europe, and the idea that the dead will come back. When you write a story about good and evil using a vampire, you are reaching back to the Renaissance for a figure as powerful as God and the devil. What I love about my readers is that they really understand what my books are about. In a conversation with Larry King following the publication of Memnoch the Devil, Rice elucidated her fascination with vampires, explaining that they served as a vehicle for exploring her own perspectives on life, good, evil, and religion. She noted that vampires, with their inherent affluence, power, and capacity for greed, provide a natural metaphor for humanity. Lestat, the central figure in the chronicles, has been described as Rice's alter ego, embodying her own internal struggles with the boundaries of good and evil, and facilitating her personal growth. While she initially identified with Louis, the sensitive and somewhat passive vampire, as the series progressed, she recognized a shift in her own feelings, and found herself drawn to the complex and often rebellious character of Lestat. The accessibility and vivid descriptions that characterize Rice's writing style are key to its appeal. Her prose paints pictures in the reader's mind, creating immersive experiences. This simplicity, interwoven with complex emotions, allows her work to resonate with a broad audience, fostering a devoted following. On December 11, 2021, at the age of 80, Anne Rice passed away in a Rancho Mirage, California hospital due to complications from a stroke. Her son, Christopher Rice, announced that the family intended to inter her in the family mausoleum at Metairie Cemetery in New Orleans. In January 2022, Anne Rice was interred in the Rice family mausoleum at Metairie Cemetery, joining her husband Stan Rice and their daughter Michelle. The mausoleum, adorned with stained glass on one side, features engravings of Stan Rice's poetry from his collections False Prophet and Some Lamb on the remaining 3 sides. It is open to the public during designated visiting hours. Are you a fan of Anne Rice's books? If so, which of her works is your favorite? Thanks so much for tuning into today's video. I post new videos every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. So be sure to like, subscribe, and click the bell to catch every episode where we dive into the Celebrity Afterlife.